Hi, welcome to this channel. My name is Jonathan and I'm a dietitian that struggled with binge eating, but now I'm free from binge eating. And now I support people struggling with binge eating because I understand how difficult it is. I want them to escape the 24/7 food thoughts, the guilt, the shame, the burden, and it's really not easy. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining how to identify the triggers and what you can do to get rid of the triggers. This is going to be a complete guide on how to put an end to binge eating, so you have a clear goal on where to go. So before we get started on how we can stop binge eating, first we need to recognize what is binge eating? What counts as a binge eating episode? Well, actually, there is a definition for that. So if you look to the DSM-5, we can actually find the definition of what actually is a binge eating episode. So first of all, a binge eating episode is characterized by eating a large amount of food in a certain period of time, much more than you'd normally do. And then second is when you feel like you're in autopilot mode, where you just can't stop eating even though you recognize fullness, but you have this intense craving to finish everything in one go. So you need two of those to be counted as a binge eating episode. So there are many criteria for people struggling with binge eating episodes. Alright, so let's get straight to the three main triggers of binge eating. And first of all, before we get straight to the triggers, first of all we need to establish and remember that binge eating is not the main problem. Binge eating is only a symptom of deprivation. So when we're struggling with binge eating, we need to recognize that our body is crying out for food. That's why it's a symptom. So we need to look to the deeper cause. We need to get rid of any form of deprivation, which I'll explain in a second, so we can turn down those alarm bells in our body so we won't have to be binge eating anymore. So let's get straight to the three main triggers to binge eating. So the first trigger is physical restriction. So what does physical restriction look like? Physical restriction could look like maybe you're skipping meals, maybe you're not eating consistently, maybe you're not eating enough, so maybe you're under eating. You're maybe eating 800 calories a day, you're just feeling hungry every now and then, and you might be thinking, okay, but I eat regular meals, I'm eating regularly. But the thing I want to ask you is, so what's your first intention after a binge eating episode? Do you want to jump onto a diet? Do you want to skip breakfast? So that is still physical restriction, and no matter what your body weight is, it's important to recognize no matter what your body weight is, how high of a body weight you are or how low of a body weight you are, your body will still recognize deprivation. And you might be thinking, okay, but if I start to eat regularly, then I'm gonna gain tons of weight. Well, actually, the research shows that if you're skipping meals and having an inconsistent eating pattern, then research shows that we're just going to overeat. Because if we're skipping meals and only knowing essentially feast or famine mode, then our body knows nothing in between. So it's gonna be thinking, okay, I need to ramp up those hunger hormones, ramp up the ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, and turn down the leptin, which is the fullness hormone. So our body's only knowing feast or famine mode. There's nothing in between. So establishing regular meals can tell your body, okay, there's food in here, so I don't have to worry. So let's talk about number two, which is the sneaky one. It's called mental restriction. So you could still be eating regular meals, but if you're ignoring your cravings or having some form of mental restriction, you're still going to binge eat. So mental restriction looks like this. Are you having a craving for, let's say, chocolate, and then you try to ignore it? You have a banana instead, or you just have some diet soda or just some water. So each time you say no in your mind to a craving, imagine that probably 100 times in a day, maybe 200 times in a day, because we're constantly thinking about food because we're often deprived. So each time you're saying no, you're building up this psychological pressure in your mind until binge eating episode. And you're probably thinking right now, okay, so I'm going to be eating regular meals and I'm going to be eating the foods I crave. But if I give myself full permission, I'm just going to be on a binge spree. I'm never going to stop again. So let me talk to you about this thing in science called the forbidden fruit theory. So essentially the forbidden fruit theory says that essentially, our bodies want more of something that we consider forbidden or the things that we restrict. So if you're removing all chocolate from your house, for example, you're going to be thinking about chocolate much, much more. So what we need to do is to implement this other theory in science called food habituation. So you have to, it's essentially exposure therapy. So to eat chocolate every now and then. And if you're worried that you might have a binge eating episode, remember, we need to eat regular meals and stay consistently full, comfortably full, maybe a 7 or 8 out of 10. So when we're thinking about including chocolate back into our diet, we try to eat it, but oftentimes we eat it and give ourselves permission and then we jump back again into another diet because we fall out of guilt. So we need to consistently eat this. And if you're concerned that you're going to be overeating on chocolate and never going to be stopping on binge eating, remember, to end binge eating, we need to stay full and satisfied. So if you're including regular meals, your breakfast, lunch and dinner with some snacks in between, being roughly 7 or 8 out of 10 full, with 0 out of 10 being extremely hungry, and 10 out of 10 being Christmas dinner full, shall I say, extremely uncomfortably full. So let's be a 7 or 8 out of 10, and we're telling our body food is available consistently, physically and psychologically. We're being full and satisfied. So if you're finding this all very difficult, then try to include the cravings, the food you normally crave or your trigger foods, let's say chocolate again, as a dessert. So after you have lunch, then have that piece of chocolate so you can sit and be comfortable in this area of being comfortably full after eating your trigger foods and not overeating on them. Number 3 is we're going to be talking about the all or nothing mindset. So do you have the mindset of calling foods good or bad, or good and bad? Well, actually, this can actually be very detrimental, and just calling foods good and bad can actually lead to binge eating episodes. So let me explain why. So whenever you eat something good, quote unquote, then okay, that's alright. But whenever you eat something bad, quote unquote, then you start to internalize these feelings. You start to call yourself bad. You start to think, oh, I'm worthy of being judged. I'm not good enough. I'm so lazy and not much of a hard worker. I'm just all these negative thoughts. You start to internalize these thoughts based on putting morality on food. So if you put morality on food, good foods, bad foods, and we start to eat those, then it makes our self-esteem very, very fragile, and then you just want to have a binge eating episode. Another thing to notice is to be aware of any last supper mindsets around food. So you might think to yourself, oh, I just had a bite of chocolate, might as well have the whole thing now, so I won't have any more temptation in my life. Just get rid of it once and for all. I promise I'll never have chocolate again. So having this last supper mindset can be very detrimental, and it can actually lead to increased urges to binge eat. And it can wreck your self-esteem, quote unquote. It can affect your self-esteem negatively the more you have this all or nothing mindset or calling foods good versus bad. So food is just neutral. Food is not good. Food is not bad. If you want to practically train yourself to retrain that there's no such thing as good and bad foods, what you need to do is to transform them into neutral foods. So how can we do that? So if we want to turn things into neutral foods, we have to include the bad foods back into our daily diet. So if you consider chocolate bad, well, I'm just using this as an example very frequently. So if you consider chocolate bad, then include it regularly. Have it as a snack, have it as a dessert every now and then. So if we're including things that are forbidden or bad, it's not really forbidden or bad if it's included into our diet. We wouldn't even think much about it. It's important to note that if you've been depriving yourself of chocolate for a long time, you might overeat on it a little bit, but that's normal. Essentially, if you're including it regularly, remember, food habituation, then you're going to get rid of this forbidden fruit theory, which we mentioned earlier. You're going to turn this food into a neutral food. So you might be thinking, okay, Jonathan, that's all well and done. I'm going to get rid of deprivation. I'm going to include the foods I love. I'm going to eat regular meals. But if I'm going to be eating all the foods I crave and eating regular meals, I'm just going to be gaining weight. The thing I have to say is that you'll be stuck in this binge restrict cycle for a really, really long time. People stay stuck in this binge restrict cycle for years, even if they're just chasing diets after a binge. There's a cycle of the binge restrict cycle, essentially, where you're constantly jumping onto a diet, then you have a binge eating episode, you feel guilty, then you start the diet again, binge eating episode, feel guilty. You're in this never-ending cycle. So to escape this, we'll have to get rid of dieting temporarily until the binge episodes stop. And the NHS, the National Health Service, recommends that weight, actually anywhere in the world for binge eating recovery, weight should not be the focus. You can do whatever you want to do with your weight after you put an end to binge eating. So as a little recap, binge eating is a symptom of deprivation. It shouldn't be the main problem. So we have to reduce the binge eating episodes. So you have to include regular meals to get rid of physical restriction. So eat breakfast, lunch and dinner with snacks in between, being a 7 or 8 out of 10 full. Consistently, the key word consistently, even after a binge episode, still try to have breakfast if you can, if you're still a bit hungry. And try not to restrict yourself, because restriction will essentially bring you back to having increased urges to binge eat. And number 2 is to include meals you crave, to get rid of mental restriction, so you're not having intense urges to binge eat even though you're eating regular meals. And number 3, avoid the all or nothing mindset. It's okay to eat the foods that you crave, and food is meant to be flexible. There's no such thing as a perfect diet. If you're including all of these, then essentially you're gonna put those binge eating episodes to rest. And I completely understand that it isn't easy. It's very difficult mentally, because when you've been struggling with binge eating for so long, you've been chasing this goal of weight loss for so long, and now I'm telling you to essentially eat the foods you crave, then eat regular meals, which sounds very counterintuitive. But the truth is that your body is on high alert. Your body thinks there's a famine, which often leads to a binge episode, which is the feasting. So essentially, unless we get rid of binge eating urges, we're always going to be straight back to square one. So we have to make that very difficult leap to escape binge eating episodes. So I hope you enjoyed this first episode, and I hope you really found it helpful. And you can always check the link in the description for my resources to how I can help you, ranging from one-to-one courses, my newsletter, ebooks, and many more. And just comment below how you found this episode. Did you find it challenging? Did you find it surprising? Did you already know about this? So I'd really appreciate it if you could check my latest video, which is over here. If there's nothing here popping up, then you're really new here. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming here, and I'll see you in the next episode, friends. Bye!